hierarchy that we've been used to in the church. I mean, you can go all the way back to Gregorian revolutions and Albigensian crusades and things for the source of that. I mean, this is pretty fundamental change that Jerry is talking about there. Can you give us a sense of how big it is?
I think it is. I mean, again, the hierarchical, monarchical church, I think it is over. But I think trying to turn it around is a monumental task as well. And I think Francis has done well in trying to, as Jerry has laid out, in going about that, as if he has a vision of a different kind of church, which I think is much more scripturally based, going back to sort of the original churches, sort of, or the community, I would prefer that word, the community of Jesus. So I think he has got a map, he's got a vision. I think there are gaps in it. I suppose particularly in relation to women. I think he just really doesn't understand women. I think he almost put women on a pinnacle in some respects. And, you know, we don't want to be on a pinnacle. We want to be treated, you know, equally. He had this kind of concept of a Marian principle and a Petrine principle. It's a little bit complicated, but, you know, Petrine meant that, you know, males were always in the direction of ordination. And the woman had a totally different position in society, which he respected and honoured. But that's not the way we are. And I think in relation to women, there's a big catch-up, because if you look at the last 20, 30 years in Ireland, in world terms, I suppose particularly in the Western world, you know, I mean, just an example, my husband did engineering, and when he did engineering, there was one woman in his class. Now, women are all over companies of engineers, you know, lawyers, doctors, everywhere else. You know, women are there in their own right. And yet, you know, we have an institution where women are sidelined to an extent. So
is that an area where you feel that, in terms of the pace of reform, he arguably fell a little short?
Yeah, I do feel that. I mean, I have to be honest about that. And it's not just about ordination either, but the difficulty, I think, in relation to ordination is that those who make decisions in the church, those who traditionally have defined doctrine, for example, have all been the ordained and excluded from, you know, women are excluded. And it's not that women should be there by right. I think the church has lost. It's like it's flying on one wing because it has excluded another dimension. I think that is the big issue. But I think he has made inroads into that. I totally would accept that. But I suppose for many of us, it's gone on for a long time. And, you know, we'd like it to be speeded up.
Laura, was he too reforming for some?
Well, he was too reforming for some. I mean, Jerry and Gina, they're on the old change train. I'm not quite there on the change train. I like the church the way it is. I like the key doctrines, and I think if you turn around after 2,000 years and say, actually, we got all that wrong, then it does undermine your authority a little bit. But look, I think Pope Francis was a very popular pope to, you know, much of the faithful. He had very strong messages in relation to hope. A huge emphasis on mercy, which I think is incredibly attractive and should always be, Catholics should always be reminded about how important mercy is. But I think he also was unnecessarily divisive in some areas. I mean, there were some unnecessary attacks on the Latin Mass. I don't attend the Latin Mass, but I certainly have friends who do. And I think he picked a fight with that part of the church that was unnecessary, because also people who go to the Latin Mass, and also families and young people that are more conservative Catholics, the younger Catholics actually tend to trend conservative, and it's the older Catholics that are trending liberal. So I think. What
did he say about the Latin Mass?
He put certain limits on the rituals. As I said, I don't think the Irish Latin Mass was restricted as much as other places, but he did put some limits on it. And I just don't think that was a fight that was necessary for him to take.
What were the doctrinal changes that you're uncomfortable with?
Well, I don't think he was quite clever in that he didn't make any huge fundamental changes to doctrine. You know, he still upheld the importance of marriage. He said that he had great compassion for women who underwent abortions, saying that they can now come back into the church through giving a confession to a priest, for instance, and not just bishops. That was a very big, important change. But he always said abortion was a grave wrong. So on the key issues, he maintained church doctrine, but he certainly had more welcoming language, and as I said, put a huge emphasis on mercy. So, as I said, some people, and there clearly is a much more liberal wing in the Catholic Church, want the Church to sort of really go further over the line to making some fundamental doctrinal changes. But then the problem with that is they have to justify it and say why all the previous popes were wrong for the previous 2,000 years and why they suddenly are correct.
Gina, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, no, there's no suggestion that all the previous 2,000 years were wrong. There's a suggestion, I think the way it is that going back to Vatican II, one of the clear sort of motifs of Vatican II was reading the signs of the times. And I think Francis has tried really, really hard to take the gospel values. And I mean, I suppose one of the revelations of a little bit of study was that the notion of the kingdom of God, the reign of God, the time of God, appears over 100 times in the four gospels. So I think things that keep coming up, and they were about gospel values of love, I think as Laura said, of love, mercy, forgiveness, justice, peace. And I think what he's trying to say, how do we apply these values to the world we live in? And, you know, God knows the world is very toxic. The world urgently, I think, needs a Christian message that makes sense. So I think he's trying to make sense of the Gospels in the light of the reality in which we live. And I think that doctrinal change is not, I think, on his agenda, but certainly teachings have changed. I mean, just go to the LGBT thing. I mean, how anybody ever thought that somebody who was a homosexual or lesbian was a lesser human being, to me, has always been mind-boggling. Long before he said, well, actually, they are full human beings. They're baptized like the rest of us, and they have the same human dignity as the rest of us. I mean, why would anybody have ever thought differently? So in terms of teaching, he's certainly happy with the blessing of same-sex couples. So I think a lot of the teaching has changed, and teaching has changed throughout the 2,000 years anyway.
Alison, to people who might describe themselves as cultural Catholics, I suspect a lot of people watching this, how do you think his tenure will have been perceived?
I think people liked him. I think they saw that he was a decent man, that he did, as has been mentioned earlier, try to do a lot for the marginalised, for the poor, trying to turn the church back into that direction. Migrants, climate, I think that's going to be a very significant thing. Actually, his loss will be felt greatly there. But Laura was mentioning there about trains, and that my worry is that we're looking at a slow train to nowhere. You know, I mean, I know he appointed all these cardinals, but we have no idea who the next pope is going to be, what direction they're going to go in. That, I mean, I know at the start there was a lot of more liberal Catholics got quite excited and conservatives quite terrified. But ultimately, when it came to things like divorce, women priests, even LGBTQ people, like no rules were changed. There was debate, there was more openness, more, I suppose, that he's, about love and kindness. But ultimately, nothing really changed, or nothing, it strikes me that how much of what he did was built in a house of cards that could now be changed back. So that at the end of the day, it's a very, I think that, like, where do you set your bar? If you're somebody who would like to see women priests, for instance, I actually think that's a fool's errand now. I'd almost see it in my lifetime. I'd almost see that as an impossibility. And that it's all been so incremental. I mean, even now, he was a man of his time, but for him that he would speak about women, about often as wives, as Gina said, I was supposed to say that on a pedestal, as wives and mothers, once talking about women being the strawberries on the cake. Now, I think he was misinterpreted there. He didn't mean decorative, but I suppose given his form and this, that's how people took him up, and that gossip was a women's thing. And do you remember he said that thing about nuns being, about their faces or how they looked being kind of sour looking? There was a comment on that a couple of years ago. And that it just sort of, it showed that not only are women not equal in the church, and yes, there's been changes, of course there has, but it's all so sort of given out in such a miserly way. And we look at the images now and we'll see all those cardinals, all those blokes going into that room and all the palaver and all so male. and so testosterone fueled, and that women are almost just like, you know, a part of the apparatus. And what, you know, that no matter what you're told or what you hear, or the hope that a lot of women, I personally have sort of given up on that, the hope that women have, I wouldn't be feeling at all hopeful in that way. And particularly to end, I think you saw with the changes that he tried to make, did get caught up in politics, particularly US Catholics, more conservative. Steve Bannon, I think even the whole Trump thing now would worry me a little bit as to how that will possibly feed into any conclave.
Laura, what are your hopes for women in the church?
I like the church the way it is. I've no desire to see women priests or women bishops.
Why not, Laura?
I just like to go to Mass and hear my gospel, and I see plenty of other women. And to be honest, I know that if you did have women priests and women bishops, it's going to be really left-wing women priests or women bishops, because the traditional, more conservative ones are usually at home raising their family like me, like I have 4 children. So I'm just going to get people...
You seem to be saying but you seem to be saying then that you think that women are not capable of being priests, or that they are inferior, so
no,
therefore not
worthy
of being
No,
priests.
you're saying that's how you interpret it.
Yeah.
I just happen to like going to Mass, and I like having my priest, and the women can do the readings and they do everything else. And I'm just happy the way it is. And if you don't, like, if you want women priests, then you can go to the Church of Ireland, or you become, you know, you can go to liberal Judaism. You could be a rabbi, and you'd get on well there. It'll be fine. I just don't have any desire for women priests. I like it the way it is. And you know, there are plenty of other, as I said, churches you can go to if that's. If that's what you want. I don't think I'm inferior or anything like that. It's always, as I said, it'll be generally people who I don't think
do you think the church?
I just find that very sad.
Do you think, as an institution, Laura, the church would be?
I'm okay.
Do you think, as an institution, the church would be fundamentally weaker for having women priests?
I don't think it would be fundamentally weaker. I think it would be a huge change, and a lot of those. So the Catholic Church, particularly in the UK,
but beyond, sorry to cut across, but beyond it being just a personal preference that you like to go, you like to hear the gospel preached by a man. It will not be weaker,
and it will not be weaker. I'll answer your question. It'll not be weaker. The Catholic Church, in particular in the UK, has increased in numbers again, especially among the youth. And in Protestant churches that have had liberal reforms, including women priests, they're losing numbers. They're losing numbers. So there's no evidence to say that if you make these big liberal questions,
if I may, Laura, if
that
those women,
they'll pick up numbers. They won't.
If the women who you say, the more conservative-leaning women who are more inclined to stay at home with their children and not wish to be, if we could just imagine for a moment that a whole bunch of those women decided, I'd love to be a priest, would you be good with that?
No, because I like the church the way it is, and all the other liberal churches that have made these changes are actually losing numbers. The Catholic Church is picking up numbers, especially in the UK and in America, and it's the same with other religions.
Gina?
Yeah, I suppose I have a difficulty with all those labels, you know, conservative, liberal. I actually dislike those intensely. And I would go back to the purpose of if you like, the objectives, the mission of the church, which is to incarnate the gospel in the world we live in. And I think to incarnate it in a sense of equality. And I think, you know, diversity, I believe in diversity in all areas of life. I think diversity brings richness to life. And I do personally know women who feel called to be ordained. I don't, but I admire them, and I admire those who sort of feel that they have been sidelined. I think they have something to offer the church. And I don't like the idea that numbers matter. I don't think it's important. I don't think it's relevant to say that other churches have women ordained as priests and as bishops, and look, their numbers are dropping. And we won't do that because that wouldn't increase our... It's not about numbers. It is about the gospel. And just finally to say, and I hope Jerry would back me up on this, Jesus ordained nobody. Jesus lived and died a Jew. He ordained absolutely nobody. But if you read the Gospels, you'll see that he was surrounded by a huge number of women. And just last Sunday, if you think of the Gospel, was St. John's Gospel. And the end of that Gospel, who was the messenger of the resurrection? Mary Magdalene. And what were we told about Mary Magdalene? She was a prostitute. You read the Gospels, there's not a single line which says Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. So, you know, there have been misinformations, misinterpretations.
Yeah.